Good evening, everyone. We're going to call this meeting to order. Ms. Jazeski, can I have a call for quorum, please?
Sure. Mr. Grippo?
Here.
Ms. Ham?
Here.
Ms. Harrigan?
Here.
Mr. Martelli? Mr. Perugini?
Here.
Ms. Rosenberg?
Here.
Mr. White? Mr. Chairman, you have a quorum.
Thank you. I ask that we stand for the pledge of allegiance.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
I was going to say, welcome to this beautiful summer evening. Not quite there yet. I want to jinx us. Thank you, everyone, for joining. But before we get into the agenda, do we have anyone from the audience that wants to make comments to the board? None? Okay. We'll get right into it. So up first is finance, and it's a discussion regarding the 23-24 operating budget.
Thank you, Mr. Perugini. Last week, last Wednesday evening, was it last Wednesday or Tuesday? Either way, Mr. Massiano and I presented the Board of Education budget to the town council. In that meeting, there was discussion on the part of the council about, potential reductions to impact both the Board of Education and the town operating budget. What was kind of concerning was the mention of a figure anywhere from 500,000 to 1.5 million. I reminded the council that the Board of Education had already reduced our operating budget by $500,000. There was open discussion about our per pupil expenditure, including a question asking why it was as low as it was, and talked about, the organizational efficiency that we have from the board down, and what the board was trying to maintain when those reductions were made. Was indeed that efficiency without, compromising program. We talked a little bit about class size being at that, at a level that's, at our all-time high, really, in several places, K through 8, basically. At the high school, the shift where we've gone from 6 classes down to 5, and how we haven't, reduced staff. We did that because it would have cost us significant money in another place if we had not done that. I wanted to share with you, there was a request from us as to, what would be the implications if further reductions were made. I regret that the items that we passed out aren't necessarily labeled per se, or with a number or something. It would have made it easier, but there's one item which is did we hand this out, Vin? This is the 8.5 by 11. Just to refresh your memory, this was our budget reflecting the reductions made at the end of January. That's the 8.5 by 11 with the red writing in the far right-hand column that shows where there was change made or not change made. In looking at this document, just to refresh everybody, because this is going back to late January and anybody who's watching, we did not make a change to our certified salaries. In part, in large part, really, that was because of the fact that we had contractual increases and our enrollment is climbing. As a matter of fact, subsequent to that budget being established, our projected enrollment is up 51 more students by NESDEC from what we had planned it on. Now, thankfully, that's not all in 5th grade or something like that, where you have to say, you need to add a teacher. You can't have 50 more kids enter the grade level. It's distributed across pre-K through 12. but what that does do is incrementally increase class size, right? I was asked the question about class size and kind of the, why that's, you know, the sanctity there. And I explained, like I know we've discussed before, that the community, our parent community, really holds that sacred, perhaps more than anybody else. Our staff, our administration, everything, we value it, appreciate it, but that's really reflected in our budget. I think it's reflected in the work that we've all done over the last many years, where we try and make that the last stop on the train, if you will, in terms of budget reductions. To further highlight some of the class size, you have this document on the 8.5 by 11, which is our projected class sizes for 23-24. This does not reflect the additional students in the latest NASDAQ report. But so, you know, you can, basically what you can do is tack 3 kids into every grade, you know, going down. I mean, if you go straight, I could tell you on the bottom of this class size sheet, it shows in kindergarten a count of 307 students. That remains the same. The 301 in first grade has been updated to 304. Then 368 from 365. 314 remains the same. 302 goes to 304. 337 goes to 338. 331 goes to 333. And that's the K through 6 change, which again is incremental increase, but it obviously would push us a little bit higher than the 18.8 that we have this year, which is the highest we've had in many years. So when asked, you know, where would we potentially make further reductions, or what, that's not the question that was asked, so I apologize, let me restate that. The question that was asked was, what would the implications be if there were further reductions? That's a fair question that gets asked on a pretty annual basis. And so, Ben, Marlene, Rob and Ann and I met immediately that next morning to evaluate updates, projections, reviews, things that may have changed from the end of January till early April. What can we project? What do we expect? One of the questions that was asked in the town council meeting was, well, don't you usually get 7 retirements? With the obvious, you know, in the neighborhood they're in. They asked how many are. Yeah, 7 is probably a ballpark figure. What has changed with the teacher shortage across Connecticut is our ability to hire the quality that we would expect at a low price point. So for many years, we could expect that a senior person retires at 100,000 and we're hiring at 50,000. Somebody right out of school, maybe. That luxury doesn't exist anymore. I can't count on that because prep programs, the kids that they turn out are really good. Just the volume isn't there necessarily. So like Cheshire, many other districts, if you get a great intern, you know you have an opening, you're trying to bring that person on. The pool of candidates isn't there. So what happens is we get bright flight, if you will. People who work in other communities but want to work here, but they've already worked 4 years or 5 years someplace else. And so we have to pay them on that 6th step, let's say, which closes that delta, closes that dollar amount that we used to be able to count on in terms of savings. So what we've done is, we know of 4 retirements right now. We're projecting about 7. We think that maybe we'll get 3 more. On that $30,000 pickup, on average. Because if you teach chemistry and you retire, I guarantee I'm not gonna save any money there. It'd be like finding Sasquatch in the pool of candidates. It's really unlikely. You know, there's certain content areas that you're hiring at the top step because that's all that's out there in the pool that you would hire. So we looked at our experience over the year with homebound instruction. Excuse me, the 7 retirements at about 30,000, just for the audience or whatever. That's $210,000 reduction potentially in our budget. We've had good management and restructuring in respect to our homebound instruction, and we think that we could potentially reduce that line by $25,000. Another proposal, which none of these are sexy, but this is just, you know, where we're thinking there is potential. The activity fee hasn't gone up in several years. If it went up by $20 a participant per season, that's $24,000. The para positions, if we were to consolidate those para positions, and again, Robin was in the conversation, we could probably get away with eliminating 5 of those and restructuring in some way to come up with $125,000 on that line. Those are the marquee changes, if you will. In reviewing our employment compensation and quotes, and looking at where we are, if we weren't in a position where we were laying off staff, which, you know, obviously if we have to cut another $1 million, this may change, but if we were on the projection where we are, it would be we could reduce that line by $10,000, the unemployment. Pupil services, we are going through spring individualized education planning, and looks like we're going to be restructuring a program at Quinnipiac that would save us $15,000. And frankly, that was it. That's a little more than $400,000 that, you know, we feel like could be adjusted without substantial impact. Now, the activity fee, that's you know, if we don't go that route, then we have a little under $400,000. When you start going on from here, there are more significant impact. One of the slides that I shared in January and I shared in the town council meeting was, as a percentage of our overall budget, what has changed in the last like 6-7 years? The biggest place of change, and I just emailed you guys an article on it, is medical benefits. So our medical benefits used to constitute about 7% of our budget. It now constitutes 9% of the budget. Our support services, our special education, over that time has become more efficient and is a lesser part of the budget. But also is our instructional expense has been contracted as a result. You know, there's only so much pie to go around. And so, you know, in looking with Marlene and then again today at, you know, where would we possibly squeeze more blood from the stone without hitting classrooms, without taking teachers out of classrooms and staff away, you know, maybe we could come up with $40,000 in instructional expense, maybe. I mean, that's it's gonna be an impact. You will impact it, you know, for things like testing supply, we looked at $3,600 for the freshman PSAT. It's an instructional resource the high school uses, but not mission critical. You know, we looked at the support services line, which includes, you know, most of the categories there have been zeroed out. We would go sub-zero on some of those, maybe come up with $25,000. One thing that's a little bit, you know, of a concern along those lines though, transportation supply is flatlined at $353. That includes diesel and unleaded gas, which, you know, is a little bit of a unknown. It's up from January, but down from, actually it's probably down from January a little bit. Then you would know that better than me. You know, where we're projecting that for, I mean, if we keep it at zero, we couldn't touch that line lower basically, because now you're really projecting that gas will continue to fall more significantly, which I don't know that any of us feel is the case. So, you know, the question, I guess, for us collectively is, what do we share back with the council? You know, if we're to remove further from here, you really have to cut staff. There's really, because you need a certain baseline dollar amount to organizationally function, which is where we are right now. We're at that, you know, especially if we make these reductions, there is no room for error, and it's going to be low. If we're cutting staff, that's the next place. Now, if you said this, everything that we've put on the table right here is nearly $500,000. If you said you need to come up with another $500,000, now we're talking about extracurricular activities, no doubt about it. That would be a proposal that, you know, because we've already cut $1 million out of what we proposed, you know, back in January. I don't know how we would continue to make reductions without having substantial impact to class size and activities. And I'm not trying to sound alarmist. I'm just trying to be matter of fact. There's, you know, when we're looking at the budget, and this is town council business, it's not Board of Ed business, but when you look at the last 10 years, this is the last item that I handed out, when you look at the last 10 years of town council budgets, the tax collection rate, all except for the pandemic, was 99.7 or higher. But it's always budgeted at 99, you know, 0.1 or 0.2 over the last, since 2016. That yields a surplus in the amount of, you know, $450,000 to $875,000. You know, it's not like there's not strong history to say that budget adjustment there in a year where we're desperate could help close the gap. You know, if you move that a few tenths of a point up, you'd still be well short of what our historical low is, even in terms of tax collection. And you'd make up several $100,000 that could be applied toward classes or whatever. Just something that we've noticed. It is a potential strategy, because we're looking for strategies to close gaps.
So
Please.
when we did our budget discussions back in January, I thought the board in particular went as far as it thought it could go with reductions. Because I know we actually had other numbers, and had a few numbers we tried to work through.
Right.
Try as that might, we couldn't get past what we came up with. I'm not comfortable giving this to the town council, to be honest with you. especially when we get a budget back yet.
Say that one more time? After not feeling comfortable giving the figure. You're talking
It
about.
hasn't gotten, yeah.
You're talking about the 400 reduction, not being comfortable recommending that to the council, okay.
Well, we're not obligated to recommend anything, right? It's just want to know what impacts are.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But that's not to say that by the time the budget comes back to us in April, May actually, there may be some other line items. I don't think you should be beholden to what you identified here. To the town council, that's all.
I think, when was that meeting? Was that last Tuesday or Monday?
Wednesday?
It was
Last
Tuesday.
Last
Tuesday.
Tuesday or Wednesday?
Yeah,
that's-
so-
that's
so
all
I think-
I'm
our-
sure it's a blur for you.
Good.
They were talking about, the revenue that they were expecting, I think on Thursday.
Okay.
I didn't watch the meeting.
Vin, I think you were there on
I
Thursday,
wasn't
right?
sure if they had,
Yeah, because they were
Walk
talking
through
about
that.
technology that night.
Thursday
Yeah.
was technology,
Yeah, technology and finance.
okay, so they hadn't discussed any additional revenues that they were looking at, or if they were gonna touch any of their reserves or, anything like that.
No, they're not at that stage yet,
Okay.
but, you know, in
They will be soon, I guess, but,
Sean Kimball's recommendation to the council, he's accounting for Grand West growth revenue. And the recommendation right now is would result in a 1.7 mil increase, so that's kind of what the council is focusing on.
And that includes the revenue.
Yeah.
So, I mean, they've asked us about, impact. I could make a more general statement to them about.
It's my opinion, I appreciate what you share,
Yeah,
outside of teacher retirements, even the 7, I think it's generous, considering the fact that, a lot of school districts are trying to find quality teachers, they can't, so it's saving them out there.
and I
If you
explained.
do have 7, you do have some retirements, but, I understand what you're trying to do, but beyond this, the impact is definitely the staff. If you have to go that far.
It would be pretty significant. To go beyond $400,000. If 400,000, I'm anxious. At more than that, I'm petrified about the impact it'll have.
Yeah, 10.
Thanks, Tony. So first of all, Jeff, thank you.
Sure.
For this. So first observation, personally, I would not want to get into a conversation with them about the assumptions they make with the collection rate or revenue grand list growth, and grand list growth would be an assumption, collection rate is. There's a lot of those pieces, and if you say this, they can say, well, what about that? They just give us the number. But I do appreciate you, reminding us that there are judgment calls that are made.
Yeah.
The other thing is that, the council can change whatever the town manager recommends. I don't know what the collection rate should be, but I do think it's appropriate to have some sort of cushion in there where you're not assuming 100% collection rate. Let's see. So in terms of staff, did you remind the council about what we're projecting for growth over the next, say, 5 years? So, I mentioned in a previous meeting, this is for the public too, just looking at the numbers, elementary school, if I recall correctly, if we kept it at 20 students, or something like that, 20 students per teacher, we're looking at adding 15 teachers at the elementary school level, not necessarily down in high school, but however far we go now, it will likely be reversing in the very near future. You were already saying before that we are 51 students above the NASDAQ number. Just to be clear, you're talking about the October 1, 2022 number.
Correct.
So we get an official head count once a year, October 1st, every year. And at this moment in time, in April, 6 or 7 months later, whatever, we're 51 students above what they said on October 1st.
No.
We're
Okay.
actually 67 above October 1st. So October 1st, our total student count was 4,160. now we're at 4,227. So we're 67 students higher than we were in October, and the projection for next year increased by 51
Okay.
over the 41 that was projected.
All right, so we're looking at an increase, what is it, 51, 115 or something like that?
From last, yeah.
The actuals October 1st, 2022 to actuals October 1st, 2023, over 100 students getting added in that year.
Right.
This comports with the basic idea of school modernization with student enrollment increasing. So if
Yeah.
we assume that our judgment call was right, that doing these schools and adding classrooms made sense and was appropriate, we're looking at this growth over the next few years. And I just think that's an important part, highlighting that you could do something this year,
Yeah.
it's probably not gonna fly for the next 5 years.
I think what you're saying without saying it is reductions in staffing create a fiscal cliff for future
Yeah,
budgets.
effectively.
Because in order to get back to the reasonable class size 2 years from now, anything you've cut now, you have to add plus.
Yeah.
Because as the growth continues. And that's, I mean, I think that's why we've been pretty judicious with the bounce forward plan to not create massive fiscal cliffs. And I think it's a good reminder that I can share with them that, yeah, I think we did share that our enrollment is up, and we did share that it's growing, but I don't think it ever hurts to restate it.
We also shared that we were in the midst of looking for additional space at both Highland and Doolittle right now, because we think we're gonna outgrow what we have before those new schools are built. So, you know, that is another piece of information that was shared.
So I have two, a question and 1 point left. So the question, I think it's very specific, or I'll try to make it specific. Just in terms of your budget, annual budget growth for instructional materials, any books or periodicals? My understanding from work, like, for me, like 5 years ago, was that periodicals online were growing at a pretty high rate, which surprised that out of me, like 6 to 8% if you were buying magazines. Do you still have that sort of growth in costs for instructional materials?
If the cost of periodicals grew by 6% a year, we just wouldn't buy them. Because
Okay.
our budget is reduced in that area. So you just limit the
Yeah.
diversity of periodicals that you're purchasing in that case.
Okay.
So along that line, and this is not just exclusively periodicals, but in the instructional expense account, library and periodicals, you can see in 21-2, coming out of COVID, we were 43,000 on that line. We increased it to 60,000 to get back to prior numbers. And, you know, if you know, gun to our head, I mean, yeah, I'm gonna look at that as a viable reduction, but it's, you know, it's not gonna touch $500,000.
Yeah,
Okay.
You're nickel and diming some changes there.
So just the one last point that I want to highlight is something that came up in discussion with the planning committee. This is not something for next year's budget, but potentially for the next few years. I know there's some moving pieces with this, but we had an energy provider, an energy service provider in here, and Ben, correct me if I'm wrong on this, but he basically said if there was a chance that we could do our own power plant with solar panels on 10 basically unused acres up in the north end of town, we could probably be saving a couple $100,000 a year. No guarantees or anything like that, but that was the general idea of what he was talking about. And I know there's moving pieces here, there's various interests and stakeholders. But I think that's something like that, a few $100,000 a year over the next 5 years. I think that's important to just highlight for the council as a possibility. Because this is not ending this year.
No.
This is going on for years.
No, we're not in a de-enrollment situation, it's the opposite, right? I think for the next few years, it's gonna be interesting.
And what is also on the horizon that has a much, much greater impact than anything we're really talking about is, you know, development. And that development will be a substantial financial windfall for the community, which should ameliorate some of the impacts here. Things like the North End project are not online yet in terms of tax collection. A lot of the housing developments are not fully online yet in terms of taxation. When they do, I mean, I think that's something that the community had clamored for years, to develop the North End to kind of ameliorate the tax impact on residents, to have more of a balance, and that's coming to fruition, but it really will impact the community next year in terms of a substantial grand list jump will come on next year.
In today's Herald, there, I don't know if you get the Monday Moment or whatever, P&Z is actually meeting to talk about putting a moratorium on commercial growth. So we have to go on and on. I mean, I can understand a residential moratorium, because actually you get more than 2 kids per household, and they're benefiting while the rest is paying. But if they stop commercial development, we're dead in the water. We'll develop whatever has already been approved, but that to me is folly. So at some point we have to go to them and say, think before you do this. But the other thing, can I just, I'm just curious, this is being filmed,
It
right?
is, yep.
So they're gonna find out what you're talking about anyway, if they, these are good things to have in your, to have if it comes, but, you know, the biggest problem we're finding is healthcare. We've gotta find what's true in our budget and see if we can somehow fix it, and there's no going back to renegotiate, cost sharing at all, is there? I mean, we're fixed for 3 years on,
With,
Talking about with the employees?
yeah.
Well, we are negotiating with the secretaries and the custodians now.
Yeah.
The other groups, though, they're locked for, 1 or 2 years more.
Yeah. And then you said they're gonna set up a task force for examining both city or town and school healthcare?
Tim announced that he was forming, sounds like a subcommittee to review, medical benefit costs. And then he was talking in particular about shopping, different providers to see if we can come in with, a lower quote.
Yeah.
and the article I sent earlier today was, I think, from the CT Mirror, examining how, I guess there's an insurance a committee of the legislature, who are highlighting, the cost of care and insurance and how these two entities have grown at a pace more than our surrounding states and peers across Connecticut, within Connecticut, and how to rein that in. As you can imagine, the healthcare providers and the insurance companies, both kind of consider each other at fault, and they're trying to resolve that. If they can find some progress before the end of the legislative session, the sense is that it could really help drive down the acceleration in the cost. But that's all after the fact for them.
That's, so all this is at least 2 years out.
Yes, it's not gonna happen.
So the insurance is not gonna change in
No.
those 2 years, task force will do its work. The insurers are just pitted against the providers, but they always are. Who cares? It's not gonna help us.
It's not.
Yeah, it's not solving the problem.
I'm sorry.
I was just gonna say, we are getting to that point, it just, we're gonna make this town too expensive for the very people we want in it, meaning young families, and that we're trying to get. And I don't know I don't know what the breaking point is, but I feel your pain, I feel your concern, we are hitting it. And the very thing that attracts people here, I don't know how to sustain it. The low class sizes and everything else, I don't know. Sorry, this is kind of all shock,
Mm.
yes, but.
Did you have anything up with your son, sir?
I just want to ask a couple things. I know these, we were just proposing thoughts here. The 7 retirements, are you just thinking you're not replacing teachers? Because clearly it's going to impact.
No. What I'm thinking of in those 7 retirements is that typically there's a net difference between the cost of hiring a new person,
Right.
you know, and what we were paying the retiree.
10
So,
is the net difference, basically.
yes, for 7 people at 30,000 per. Typically, you know, like I was saying, in years past, several years ago, we could see a larger delta there. So it might be 350,000.
Right.
But I think that would be really, you know, it wouldn't be wise to budget that now.
Yeah, I know. So, and then from that, what is the contracted class size for the teachers?
We don't have contractual limits. Yeah. It's not defined in the contract.
Reasonable class sizes.
Yeah.
Because there is a 50-50, I'm sure you know, argument about class size, and so you need to at least satisfy the minimum contracted class size.
Yeah.
Or maximum, so to speak.
Yeah, so, you know, I think that's something that if we wanted to ask parents, if we surveyed our parents tomorrow and said, what are the things you hold most dear? I mean, I hear the argument that, you know, taxpayers are upset about this. Parents will go apoplectic
Mhm.
if we start jacking up class sizes. And that's not just hypothetical. I mean, I've seen that, and we've surveyed that, and done that many years ago, and I have no reason to believe that that would change tomorrow. I mean, I just know it's the case. Whether or not that is grounded in research is a whole different argument.
I'm sure the anecdotal, and I know where the actual research.
Yeah. Unfortunately, it tends to sometimes, but.
Oh, yeah, just a comment? Oh, yeah, no, just,
But go ahead, he's been waiting.
Faith had mentioned the contract, so this is really for, just for people watching at home. If we ever did, if the board ever chose to reopen the contracts, it's a two-way street, right? So it's not, oh, let's just, you know, change the cost share and the healthcare benefits. It's,
No, I understand.
no, I know, I'm just saying for people at home, there's somebody, yeah, why don't you just do that? It's not that easy.
Well, both parties have to agree to open it,
Yeah,
which,
yeah,
even if it did, there's gonna be just history. If we ever got to that point, which I doubt, we're gonna raise the healthcare premiums, there's gonna be something else that's gonna offset that, which is gonna be salary, so.
yeah. It's a two-way street, it's not just we get to do something. 'Cause-
No, yeah, so it does require both parties to say yes, and then start talking about it, but,
And you
Yeah.
have to pay lawyers while you do
well, there's, hold on. And I'm sorry, you were.
No, I just had, for Vin, did Sean reveal what the value of a mill is this year?
Roughly 3 million.
Yeah, I think it's just under 3 million
Oh, that's great.
per mill.
I was
I don't have the exact.
I was
number,
afraid you
but-
were gonna say it was gonna be lower than that, okay. All right, so that gives us a little headroom if they want 1.75. I mean, yeah. Hopefully they won't go higher than 400, an additional 400. Because if they're trying to work that, and so that's about a less than 5.1 million increase-ish, then we could squeeze under with potential recommended additional reductions.
Go ahead.
This is the
Oh, I didn't know, they had something on
You
it.
had your hands up.
Yeah, so I'm wondering if what was asked for couldn't be addressed in more of a narrative than
Yeah,
us trying to find.
yeah, I mean, certainly I could draft something
So to
that
talk about,
articulates the tenor of the conversation.
yeah, so the situation with retirees, why we wouldn't be really realizing that much from that. The class sizes are already gonna be getting bigger because of of the enrollment numbers, and so that's not a place we can go, and, because it is $24,000 here and $10,000 there is nickel and dime. I'm sorry, it just is, it's futile, and it doesn't make much sense to me to be finding another 20,000 here and another 30,000 there. It's just, let's just present the situation as it stands, and in order not to impact the instruction that our parents are expecting to have for their kids in school, then, we really don't have a lot of wiggle room right now.
I think that's, just knowing everybody here, in our discussions, I think that's our biggest concern is, we start increasing class sizes into the mid-20s, especially the lower grades, it starts to become detrimental. In instruction, plus, it's not just instruction anymore, right? So there's social, emotional behaviors, we have school climate issues, it's gotten pretty interesting since COVID. Kids still adjusting and coming to speed, so that's where our biggest concern is. So, you have to try nickel and dime to find something without impacting that. I get that. The question I have, Jeff, is you mentioned Highland and Doolittle, potentially additional space. Are you thinking for 23, 24, or next school year? And if it is 2024, do we budget any costs for that?
So the planning committee has been working on, well, this year, we brought in a consultant to evaluate the current space to determine if things could be reconfigured and to what degree and what sort of cost would be incurred to move walls, et cetera, things internally. It appears that we've really maximized that internal space. What we were looking at is the addition of trailers at Doolittle and Highland for the 24-5 year. And that would be, when we would incur that cost. Now, granted, we're seeing substantial growth now. Like I think I've shared with you, 852 kids at Highland right now. And so, we moved one of the new Stonebridge Crossing neighborhoods to Chapman to try and limit the impact. We're moving people around. There's I can say with 100% certainty that there will be people moved from rooms at Highland placed on carts to provide instruction mobily. And they won't have their room anymore because we need it for another classroom for next year. The subsequent year, we would definitely need to add additional space.
We do have $300,000 in the capital budget for this year requested if we had to do portables, and $250 the following year. But that is capital, not the operating budget.
Faith and Tim.
Okay. You all can shoot me if this is like the last question. Where are we in terms of releasing funds for this year? Are we at like 70%?
70.
Okay, we're in April. Is there any way that we can look to some of our expenses for next year and put them in this year? Like significant savings, and, because we're 7/8 of the year.
That's not a crazy question. That's actually
Thank you,
something
Chuck.
that, yeah, you're beating yourself,
They do
take the
that
hair
every
shirt
year.
off. You don't have to beat yourself up over it. It's a good question, and it's something that we look to try and do. I just want to be clear in that when we say 70%, it's not 70% of our total budget we've spent, and that 30% of the total budget is left. A lot of our budget lines are already covered. So, like, I know that we're gonna pay teachers through the end of the
Right.
school year, right? So that's 100%. What we're at 70% of is more of the discretionary account. So there is money there, agreed, and there are things that we would look at trying to pre-purchase and limit impact for next year. But it's not, I don't want people to walk away thinking it's 70% of our entire budget, and we have 30% of our entire budget left. It's 30% of a fraction of the budget. So, Vin, do you have a sense on those discretionary accounts?
It's like
Rough numbers.
3 to 4 million max.
Yeah.
And that includes that maintenance line, so. Yeah, and it's the non-payroll expenditures is the way we refer to it.
So wait, the majority of it is, we have three
It's
minutes.
maintenance money, it's some,
If you had your instructional
Instructional supply
supply,
money.
your maintenance lines, and some of your support service lines.
So can we do a spend down, like a hard spend down right now? I mean, I'm kind of with what Faith is saying, is, you know, looking at those that we know are expenditures that,
well, right now, what we do in April is incrementally spend down, because if there is an adjustment somewhere, something comes in, we need to be able to cover that bill. So what typically happens is we get down till, almost the last day of school. And then anything that we've deferred through the years, through the school year, that is a more of a mission critical item, or like paper, that we can pre-purchase for 24/5, 23/4, we would start buying that like later in the year. But if, God forbid, there's an outplacement cost or something that rolls in, we need to be able to cover it before we start spending down. So we usually engage in that process like early June, where we start really evaluating how much money do we have left. We saved it. How much money is left, that 3 million and change? And then where can we get the most bang for the buck, and how much can we apply to next year? A lot of this is maintenance stuff that's also deferred that really has to take place. Tim?
Yeah, so in years past when I've looked at this, I'll say the last few years, with COVID, with ESSER funds, it's been, I feel, an anomaly, but in a typical year, call it a $70 or $80 million budget over the last 15 or 20 years, you're always gonna have some money that you're uncertain of. The snowplow budget is over or under anything. And oftentimes, I would ask myself when I was on the council, why does this money ever come back to the council? Nothing ever did. But when I looked at it, it's a few $100,000 a year that oftentimes is just getting shifted to maintenance, which is just delayed year after year until, the facilities team are like, we're not doing it anymore, it's not safe at this point, we need to do this. And then put that few $100,000 into maintenance, into whatever with the buildings. And I don't feel like this is necessarily that different of a year than we've seen in years past, where you would probably have some of that stuff. I mean, school modernization is here, we still have 6 buildings that are untouched, or 5. But I'm just thinking that's probably what ends up happening in terms of any money that's left, that's probably good.
The 30%, what that represents is expenditures that we budgeted for this year that we're not making until we know that we're not gonna run out of money in some other account. So to the extent that, there's some available funding at the end of the year, what we typically do is we will make supply purchases, equipment purchases that we have to make over the summer for next year, because you can't wait till next year to spend and order those items. Maintenance items are a good example. At the end of the year, if we have remaining maintenance funds, we dedicate it to projects. We always kind of review that at the last budget meeting of the year.
And it happens over the summer, the maintenance stuff.
Yeah.
Instructional, you can buy supplies anytime, but maintenance is summertime project.
Yeah, but some of the instructional supplies have a long lead time. So yeah, that's part of the ordinary course. There are some budget categories that are kind of tight, as we're going into this year, some of the salary lines. So we'll work that through over the next couple of months. Tim, to your point, I don't see that we're gonna have a large balance at the end of the year. I think it's a fairly, typical year. The accounts that I'm worried about have to do more with the substitute costs, pretty high this year. So we'll have some, but not a lot. And then the other place, if there's money remaining at the end of the year, sometimes we'll contribute it to the medical benefits reserve fund, which this year the board knows you know, we increased the amount that we're funding to medical claims, but just to fund the medical claims, we're not building up our reserve. And so we're on track for that, you know. I'm not gonna build up our reserves this year, we're not gonna deplete them either, which is part of our goals.
Yeah, well,
Amen.
it's April, so it's
Yeah,
reasonable that, yes.
When does school modernization hit the town budget?
This year by about like $5.
Okay.
Next year, to the average taxpayer, next year, it would be, it jumps to like 17 or something. It's not huge.
So when's the big piece hit?
A couple of years out from what I
Okay.
recall. But
and
again,
it's 3 years out before, that's when you
the,
start
but I
hitting.
don't know that necessarily calculated growth into it either, grand list growth.
Oh, no,
So
I was talking about the
It's
expense
like
side.
if we were only spending that, these are when and how much the increases are. But development, you know, mitigates the impact of some of that, obviously, so.
Sure.
Unless you stop developing.
What is the conversation from the town on the medical benefits? Because they have this
Same problem we do.
that we do, so, are they talking about, I mean, are they doing the same thing that we're doing?
They're starting this
And they're-
task force to evaluate that.
And that will be for hours,
Collectively,
As
I
well,
think between both sides, yeah.
okay.
So, you know, I think I'm hearing just a synopsis that, you know, we can articulate that the board's gone through the process of making substantial reductions already. That we have grave reservations about making further substantial reductions. You know, and we'll go from there.
If I could, before we
Yeah,
close,
please.
we didn't really have a chance to make comment on last Tuesday. You did, obviously, you did, but
Sure.
I didn't get a chance to make comment, and since we're on video, I'll say now that the Finance Committee and the board as a whole, this was probably a very difficult budget year, because we really went through and we're trying to, knowing the increase that you had asked for, you know, we were trying to look for ways to save but not, you know, damage the quality of our education. And the solution we came up with wasn't, you know, it was you know, everyone had their reasons for voting for it or against it. And that was really slicing it as close as we could without, you know, endangering any programs or positions. So going farther does make it a lot more difficult, because we're in this expansionary time is what really makes it difficult, is everything's just gonna keep growing. And like you said, it's gonna create that fiscal cliff. If you reduce now, it'll just come back twofold later. So it's really gonna have to balance our solution this year, whatever it is.
I might, maybe, you know, it's a great point. My mind goes back to fiscal cliff comment you guys both mentioned, which, so I think it was in 2020 when the pandemic was hitting. You know, I want to say we gave back or deferred about 2.2 million in
It's a
total
significant number, yeah.
to help back then. And, you know, I kind of knew back then that, you know, if only postpone that for a while. I don't think we ever recovered that over the last 2 years. So I think that's, you know, again, it's mostly in classroom staff support. That didn't go away, unfortunately.
Right.
It's still here and growing, so there's a fiscal cliff in every time we try to.
Well, is it fair to say also that because of the pandemic, the last couple of years, we've really made out well because of state and, well, let's go federal funding because of the pandemic stuff. And we really benefited by being able to
Yeah, it's helped. It's
bring a
helped.
lot of that into our budget.
Yeah, which should
Cover
have to
some
come,
budget
which should have
areas.
to come from taxpayers. well,
Yeah.
we can argue because of,
Everything.
but they come.
It just goes around from hand to hand.
But in real general terms, Jeff or Vin, if either you happen to know it, in the funding that we got related to COVID, just generally speaking, versus costs that we have related to COVID, it could have been tents or cleaning, or whatever, or additional cleaning. Was there a net benefit to that, to the school system? Because I was
Yeah.
under the impression we spent so much on cleaning, yeah, they're good.
Ben could probably give you a percentage better.
I'm just looking for a general
I mean,
idea.
half the money, and my numbers is about $2 million,
Yep,
was spent on health and safety needs, whether it's tents,
Okay.
intraday cleaning and those types of things. And the other half is being spent on resources that are in the classroom. It's the math coaches, it's the reading and math specialist, and,
Additional literacy support in classrooms.
so, and then you could say that, well, why did we need those resources? Well, you need those resources to address the learning loss. So I think there were resources there to cover the cost, but
if I'm recalling correctly, one year we got $1 million for one of these things, and the same day, Meriden got $36 million.
Yeah.
They're
Yep.
double the size of Cheshire. So I'm feeling like Meriden may have gotten sort of net benefit in relation to COVID funds, but I don't recall Cheshire it being, financially, I don't recall it being a benefit to us.
Yeah, I wouldn't call it a game changer.
Well, it was helpful, I mean, it was.
It's nice.
Meaningful,
COVID
but
happened,
no, it
yeah.
wasn't, it wasn't.
Well, we wouldn't have been able to balance our budget.
No,
without
that's
it,
true,
so.
that's true.
Yeah.
Is there,
And
so,
that's like for certain items.
just,
Yeah.
I remember when we did ask the question when this came up, and we were going to, when the COVID funds came in, I know it was asked, are these positions gonna become permanent?
And they haven't. We're
But
still
they-
paying for them out of the federal money.
But what happens when that federal money's gone? And then secondly, are we ever going to be caught up on learning loss? I mean, is this just, and I'm not saying this to you, like, where is it? I'm just
Yeah.
wondering, are we ever gonna hit the day where we're not blaming everything on COVID and we're saying, yeah, our kids are caught up and we're here and is that
I hope so.
day coming?
I hope so, but we're budgeted with that through next year, because we've been really judicious about how we spent that money. And I think we evaluate that through the lens of a few different places. The achievement being one, the enrollment being another, and how has that shifted? I mean, if you go back to our enrollment in 2020, when we were working through that and those questions were being asked, it's going to be substantially different than our enrollment in 2024. And so are those positions, did they become necessary because they existed? Or did they become necessary because of enrollment? Or did they become necessary next January when we're having this conversation because of some other reason? I think we'll be evaluating that over the course of the next, I guess, roughly 6 months now, 9 months. Until we're back at the budget table again, trying to work out next year's budget and looking at, our enrollment at that time. Also, in the face of the consolidation that'll occur when we bring 3 schools into 2. It's another consideration that we have in that process.
So,
I think there's some direction.
I mean, if this
This
is
is helpful.
If this is what you're gonna recommend to the council with a number for 400,000,
Yeah. Yeah, I think collectively, I'm not hearing that we want to put a specific number on the table. I think what I'm hearing is that, the finance committee and board went through substantial effort to balance, as Adam articulated, fiscal consciousness in the light of our growing enrollment and wanting to sustain the product that we have. And you look at our numbers, it's not like our staff count is, the leader in the dirt or anything like that. We're middle of the road in terms of our staffing. We're doing everything really efficiently when you look at every indicator. And so the cuts hurt more, and we're at a place where more significant cuts are really going to impact us.
Jeff, why are we communicating this to the parents?
because this will eventually.
Yeah, after the meeting the other night, I thought about, firing something off that may have been impulsive and not good. Yeah, so I did not.
Always better to wait.
I did not, yeah. And so I think, this is a place where we could communicate with parents now about where things stand. It's hard, I respect the work that the council does. I don't want to be accused of being alarmist. On the flip side, I'm not out to round everybody up and attack the council. On the flip side, I don't want to keep people in the dark either, if there are legitimate concerns out there. And so striking a balance, I think, is something, our communication is generally pretty good like that, and we'll work on that. Put something up.
Increasing awareness is one thing, but
Yeah,
stirring the pot.
inflaming,
Don't do that.
I hope your kid liked their last year of baseball is not what my email subject line is gonna say.
Well, listen, I think the awareness is, it's fine, I think we covered it tonight, and,
Yeah.
I know, in past years, when town councils had to make reductions across the board, parents, and even, not parents, well, they would find out literally the night the town council's making a decision, and
Yeah,
they'll say they didn't know, and then town council says, well, I was gonna show up and tell us. So I think to make it aware is one thing, again, we don't know what the town council's gonna do necessarily, you obviously have an idea what they're leaning towards. But, I say they'll tell you too, if they get your feedback from the town, if they think it's consideration, so.
Yeah, they mentioned that, one person came last year?
right. And I think the tone, that point you just made about awareness
So it's,
versus alarming, two separate,
I don't think we're alarmed,
and just the way that we'll craft the message.
But, unfortunately, it's gonna take something after the fact, a reduction, and then when the meeting happens in late May or early June, when we're talking about next year, and that's when
Yeah.
the word comes out, it's gonna be too late for folks to
Yeah.
chime in, but at least make them aware where we are, I don't think it's a problem.
Yeah.
So something hasn't been decided yet, so.
Mhm.
So, probably want to move on to the next topic, which is discussion and possible action regarding the Cheshire Adult Education Program.
I distributed a memo to the board that had really, been drafted and shared without details several weeks ago, but I was asked by Wallingford not to share it until their board had the opportunity to review it. Subsequently, the Wallingford Board of Education met and formally invited us to merge with their adult education program. The adult education program is really kind of twofold. There's a mandated program, as I've shared with you in the past, that engages students in things like English language learning and GED programs. Then there's an enrichment program that could be yoga, could be a finance class, or jam making, or whatever the case may be. You had to put a plug in. So those two separate things.
Or just jam.
Just jamming. Jamming could be its own class
Should
too,
have
I
had
guess.
to write my description.
But the enrichment program, we've put a lot of time and energy into putting the brochure together, printing it, mailing it to everybody in Cheshire. And then, unfortunately, the substantial number of classes don't run because we just don't get enough enrollment. Nevertheless, we've had to, review the proposal from the teacher, have them complete W-2 forms, not W-2, W-9 forms, and, go through that process, which is very laborious. On the mandated side, our enrollment is about 32 students. We started to look around at what are other communities like Cheshire doing to support this, and I was a little surprised to find that, in Derby, we are really one of the few people who don't already consolidate with another community. And when we started to examine that with a little bit more depth and look at what are the benefits and what are the costs associated with the potential merger, the benefits so far outweighed the costs that I felt almost negligent for not exploring it sooner. So when we talk about what some of the benefits are, on page 2 really is the best graphic orientation as it relates to this. So, you know, in Cheshire, we offer 4 hours of citizenship per week. Wallingford will be offering more than likely 6, depending on enrollment, but we're anticipating they have a much more robust, where you see that dramatically is the GED, Adult Basic Education is the ABE. 6 hours a week in Cheshire, they offer 36 hours, 6 times as much. In ESL, they have 3 times as many classes. In the credit diploma program, we don't offer that here. Students are already going to Wallingford for that. The National External Diploma Program, the credit diploma program we don't offer, but they do offer it as a potential option now. Our students could go to Wallingford and seek that. That's for students who haven't completed a traditional high school diploma and don't want to take a GED, but want to take specific classes to accrue credits for a more traditional path. That's usually a younger student. We don't really have high school students here that go that route. We support them through Humiston more. But somebody who might move here might want to do that, and they can get that through Wallingford. Tim, you have a question about that?
Yeah, I'm just trying to, what's an example of something like that? Like the kid is 16 years old, basically drops out,
Sure.
17 or 18 years old.
Could be.
Wait, I want to move in that direction.
Yep.
So they're not enrolled
So,
in GED. Did you think a couple
I used to
classes?
teach this actually
Okay.
when I worked in Wallingford.
Yeah.
It would be from 5 to 9 at night. Students would come at 5 o'clock. It was kids that had dropped out of high school that wanted to take English. They wanted to get a more typical traditional credit of English that would accrue toward a degree, toward the 25 hours that you need to be a graduate. And then you get your credit diploma certification, your degree, through that program. So when you look at just the stark number of hours, that's one thing. But what I also really appreciated was the wraparound services that they provide by way of counseling. That they have a dedicated career counselor. They have a dedicated college counselor. They have a dedicated counselor who can just meet with you about, you know, social emotional issues, maybe having mental health issues, things that we don't currently offer any of our students. They're still able to offer enrichment courses in Cheshire. So, but now if I'm running my yoga class here through my studio and only 4 people show up, now you have all the additional eyes in that brochure. The brochure goes to everybody in Cheshire. It'll broaden opportunities for people in Cheshire too, if they want to go to Berlin or Wallingford for adult ed class that may catch their eye there. If there's not enough folks that are interested in, you know, voodoo in Cheshire, but maybe there are to run the class now between Berlin, Wallingford, and Cheshire. And so it just provides a greater access and better likelihood, particularly for our businesses here, that the classes may run. In terms of the drawbacks, they run their mandated programs either at Sheehan High School, or they call it the train station in downtown Wallingford. It's where they do their Christmas tree and menorah there, right in the center of the town where that gazebo is. It's a quick drive to either of those locations. Our mandated students already drive to their mandated classes here. For some people, depending on where you live in Cheshire, it could be a closer drive, actually, to Sheehan to the train station. So we felt like that was addressed for those 30 some odd students. And then the other piece is the staff. We have 5 staff in the mandated program right now. 1 does not plan on returning next year. 4 others will be guaranteed interviews in Wallingford. They have obviously a better schedule to be able to offer more hours. They also pay $10 an hour more than we do and give access to medical care. So, you know,
really a drawback.
that's a, you know, if you get that job, it's a nice perk, you know. So you get more hours at $10 more an hour in medical care. So, I mean, when I'm identifying that as the drawback, that you get a chance to make $10 an hour more with medical care, I mean, we're really stretching here. So, I invited Ryan to attend tonight. Ryan's been overseeing our adult ed program, Mr. Murphy, and this is another reason why we think it's a benefit, that he spends probably about 15% of his time on navigating adult education. And now, for the same cost that we're currently spending on adult ed, I get Ryan back. The secretary, Jen, who used to work alongside Carol until she resigned to take a different position this August, she only wanted to work 10 months instead of 12, was spending substantially more time on adult ed. We withheld rehiring that position until we knew what we were doing with adult ed, but to rehire that position would be really beneficial for Carol and our offices up here, and you know, I don't have to dedicate any of that time to adult ed anymore, which is a real benefit for us. So there may not be a massive financial benefit, but I think there's a significant instructional benefit, and there's a significant time benefit on our end that we will realize as a function of entering into a 3-year agreement with Wallingford. So at the end of 3 years, if we don't like it, we can always go back. And the state would still fund us, you know, pay us instead of paying Wallingford to facilitate it.
I don't remember if we talked about this last time, but was there a minimum to run a class, and would this cap it?
There's a minimum to run an enrichment class, so whatever the cost of the instructor generally is the minimum. And there come times where we say, well, you know, we only have X number of people to run the class, you okay with that? And they say yes or no. But we don't pay more than that. You know, we don't take a loss, is my understanding, Ryan, correct me if I'm wrong, on an enrichment class.
I think the only instance where that would be if an instructor was teaching multiple sessions or multiple classes, and maybe they had additional students in this one that was more than covering the cost, and they were one short over here, then that would balance it out.
Yeah, so the net,
Yeah.
we're not losing, but we need enough bodies to run it without taking a loss on it.
And then is there a cap of how many are in these mandated programs? So that there's no limiting of opportunities. So if I need to get my GED, I go and look up how many sessions are being run, and then the sessions are capped, if there is a
Yeah.
cap.
No, they would run more sessions. I mean, having worked in that adult ed program in the past, and knowing the volume that they do, and that's another thing that we didn't talk about from an instructional perspective. If you're trying to learn English, to have more people with you can be very beneficial. But they add sections you know, to meet the demand.
So could you have gone to, in the past, could you have gone to a neighboring town to do your GED, or does it have to come from your town?
Every school has, every district has a different set of regs, but we wouldn't enroll out-of-towners into the Cheshire Adult Ed program. We do with an agreement, you know, and there's an agreement now with, if we had an agreement with Wallingford, they would guarantee our people enrollment.
Did you want to add to
Yeah.
So there are actually some instances where we do, in the mandated classes, take students from other towns. but it is very rare. The majority of surrounding towns do not. And the lack of kind of flexibility in our offerings this year has prevented some students, like I had a couple instances earlier in the fall where students were looking to take their GED, but the work schedule wasn't matching up with, you know, our 6:30 to 8:30. So knowing that they had morning sessions, they had afternoon sessions, reached out to them, they're unable to take, you know, prior to any sort of agreement, anybody outside of Wallingford. And same thing with the majority of surrounding districts,
So this does have more flexibility.
significantly more.
Oh, well, I mean, this is a big deal, that's why I asked Ryan for this data from Wallingford, because the flexibility we have now to engage in these classes, we couldn't provide that. And that's why, you know, I think that there's a huge instructional benefit for people to actually have better access to these classes, where the door would be closed on them because they lived in Wallingford in the past, and maybe my schedule didn't work out, and so now you were out of luck. And now there's much greater opportunity. I think it's a tremendous win for that group that needs, it's a very small group, and it was a significant commitment on our time for not a great return. And now I feel like win-win. You know, they get a great return without our investment of time.
So I'm totally for this, I think it's time that we do it, but I just want to make sure
Sure.
you say that we are not saving a lot of money, but we're not going, is this going to cost us at any point over the 3 years?
No, it's a
that you-
fixed contract with them, year over year, so it's.
Like we were, what were we, 100,000 or something for?
Yeah, but part of that is salary
Right,
for the secretary
right.
and for Ryan. This is 50,000, I think, the first year, 52 the next, and maybe 54 the year after that. So we had actually proposed a different fee structure. They had already entered an agreement with Berlin, and, you know, with this current fee structure, and it was like, we weren't sure if, it was almost like entering a variable rate mortgage. If our enrollment went up, we could have been in trouble on our budget in this area, which could happen. If it went down, maybe we would have made a few grand or something. So I'm comfortable with the fixed rate, you know, and it reflects what we receive from the state, so we're in a good place.
Thanks. So we have this, you give us this list here of 5 items: citizenship, GED.
Yep.
So those are major buckets where we're getting benefit by moving from Cheshire to Wallingford.
Yeah.
Is there anything here that's going the other way, like another major bucket, another category of? Okay, good.
No, it's just, you know, these are the mandated courses. It actually expands our mandated courses, because like I said, we don't offer a credit diploma program. We don't offer it because, I mean, there's really no demand for it, very limited. But if it comes up, at least the option exists now.
So I like it, I mean, I support it, and thank you for pulling it together.
But I really appreciate the time and energy Ryan put into chasing this stuff down, and Marlene and Vin. It was really our whole crew, but Ryan has a lot of connections, and it was really helpful for him to be able to make this happen.
Thank you, Ryan.
Yeah.
Any other comments from the board?
Yeah, I would just say that I think vision-wise, it just makes a lot of sense, so. Thank you for everyone.
So we need to make a motion? Yes. Someone to make a motion? I didn't write one in advance. Tim?
Sure. I make a motion to, that the Cheshire Board of Ed engages with Wallingford. Is it their board or their town? I'm not sure. Doesn't matter.
I don't think it matters.
All right, so the Cheshire Board of Ed
To Wallingford Adult Ed.
engages with Wallingford Adult Ed to transfer our program to them.
For the
For the
period
3-year.
dating, 2023-4 school year through 23-4, 24-5, 25-6 school year.
Exactly.
Sorry.
Is there a second?
Sure.
Second. Any discussion on the motion? All those in favor, please raise your hands. It is unanimous. Thank you. Motion passes. Thank you so much, Jeff and Ryan and the team for making this happen.
Thank you.
And also special, I want to thank Wallingford Board of Education too, for helping out this great partnership.
We were worried that they might not take us because they're taking on Berlin too, but they figured that we're already growing, now's the time to take it in, so it worked out.
Seeing as there's no other business, I'm going to make a motion to adjourn. And seconds, all those in favor. Meeting's adjourned. Thank you.